I can't think of anyone else who is so comfortable with a symphony orchestra and in that world, and is also a real jazz musician. You get people that kind of straddle both camps, but they're really classical, dabbling in jazz, or they're really a jazz musician dabbling a bit in the orchestra. Lalo is a master in both areas, and that's why what he does is so unique.
Joe Glazer, he called me to his office, and he said, this young guy plays piano with Dizzy Gillespie, wants to make music for the film industry. I said, what are I going to do with that? He said, you got to take care of him. You got to be the manager. I said, I can't manage a white guy. So Lalo and I came to California in 1963. You just don't find nobody that did as many films as Lalo did. He had to be doing something right.
He said to my father that he doesn't want to be a classical musician. He wants to be a jazz musician. That's what he liked. He liked jazz. And my father had a heart attack. I mean, I remember that day. He almost died. My father died. So he says, okay, you're not going to be a classical pianist. You have to study law.
He had tears, you hear?
I played with the greatest jazz musicians in the world. Why that happened, I don't know, but it did happen.
In 1951, 19-year-old Lalo Schfrin had been accepted into the Paris Conservatory of Music. For the child prodigy, son of Argentina's greatest violinist, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. His musical career would span the next 6 decades and amount to the equivalent of at least 3 separate careers, any one of which would be the envy of most musicians. First, there's Lalo Schfrin, the jazz musician, who toured the world with Dizzy Gillespie, playing with such jazz greats as John Coltrane, Leo Wright, Count Basie, Ray Brown, Stan Getz, Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, Miles Davis. His very first album with Dizzy, which Lalo wrote and arranged at age 28, sold over 1 million records.
So Lalo brought Gillespie piano, and he played. And I said, well, what are you doing? He said, nothing. I said, well, you want a job? He said, yes. He joined the band there. Shooby dooby oops, 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 shooby dooby oops, 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 shooby dooby oops, 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 shooby dooby oops, shooby dooby oops, shooby dooby oops, 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 shooby dooby.
There's also Lalo Schifrin, the Latin jazz musician, who after coming to America, worked as Xavier Cugat's arranger and musical director. Over the years, he turned out nearly 100 jazz albums, a number of which were Latin jazz, everything from bossa nova to Cuban jazz. And in 2000, he became the musical director for the Los Angeles Latin Jazz Institute.
Let me put it this way, I didn't express all the music I had inside me by playing jazz.
Then, there's Lalo Schifrin, the classical musician, who has conducted some of the finest orchestras in the world. The London Symphony Orchestra, the Paris Symphony Orchestra, the Israeli Philharmonic. He has written concertos, ballets, symphonies. He's recorded albums of Brahms, Stravinsky, Ravel. He was the arranger for the Three Tenors concerts, which are among the highest-selling classical albums of all time. He also created the groundbreaking Grammy Award-winning series, Jazz Meets Symphony, which unites the sounds of the symphony orchestra with that of improvisational jazz.
Going 90, I ain't scary, 'cause I got the Virgin Mary assuring me that I won't go to hell.
Finally, there's Lalo Schfrin, the film composer, who scored over 120 movies and television shows.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
I guess I wasn't aware of just how much movie music he'd written, how many things he'd done. And it was this voyage of discovery then. Each thing I'd look and I'd go, he did that too? You know. And of course, one listen to it, you go, of course he did.
He scored some of the most iconic movies in American cinema.
I know what you're thinking. Did he fire 6 shots or only 5? Well, to tell you the truth, in all this excitement, I've kind of lost track myself. But being this is a .44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and would blow your head clean off, you've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
And his innovative use of contemporary and traditional styles forever changed the sound of movie music.
Go ahead. Make my day.
His film work garnered 3 Grammy Awards, 6 Academy Award nominations, a star on the Walk of Fame, BMI's Lifetime Achievement Award, and countless other awards. And his most famous composition, his signature theme, is continually voted in the top 10 most recognizable movie themes of all time.
Recording will self-destruct in 5 seconds.
My father was a concertmaster at the Teatro Colón, which is the opera house that we have in Buenos Aires. My mom was young, when she had Lalo, and they were growing up together. And my father was 20 years older. So I guess Lalo had a very strong relationship to my mom. My mom was very beautiful, green eyes and, very, very pretty. And Lalo and her, were together all the time. My mother was forced into the marriage because My grandmother loved music. She used to go to the opera house with the children. My grandfather was a musician also. For them, you know, for the daughter to marry, even though he was divorced, he had a life before, for them it was like getting her to marry a king. In Argentina, you didn't have divorce. It's a Catholic country. So they had to marry through Uruguay. But my mother said, you know, she was very young and she said when she had the baby, it was like having a doll.
Boris Claudio Schifrin was born in Buenos Aires in 1932 into a musical family. The Schifrins were Russian Jews who suffered persecution at the hands of the Tsars.
It was terrible. They told me stories. The Cossacks would come with horses into their homes with the sabers, killing people just like that.
Those who were able to fled Europe for America. Most headed for New York. Renowned clarinet player David Schifrin, a distant cousin, hails from this line of the family. The Schifrins who emigrated to Argentina did so for the simple fact that they missed the boat to New York.
The boat that he was going to take in England had a quarantine and he had to wait.
The next boat happened to sail for Buenos Aires, and the man at the port convinced them whether it was north or south, it was still America. Almost everyone in his family played an instrument. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. His mother played the piano. But no one had a greater impact on Lalo than his father Luis. For 30 years, he was concertmaster and first violinist of the Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires, where his brother Roberto was first cellist.
It was built at the time Argentina had a lot of money, and it's one of the best opera houses in the world compared to the Opera of Paris and other places. So it was built with love and beautiful. I mean, the acoustics in that place is amazing.
Lalo spent his earliest years hanging around the orchestra, becoming a kind of mascot. At age 5, after making a particularly astute comment about a certain Bach fugue, Luis realized his son had an exceptional ear for music.
But I want to change the way the fugue should get slower and slower and slower. I said, that's fantastic. That's really fantastic. And so he decided I was going to be a concert player. The thing that he couldn't be in the violin, I was going to be in the piano.
Luis had studied at the Vienna Conservatory of Music and was set to return to Europe on tour when the outbreak of World War I shattered his dream of being a world-famous concertmaster. He would make sure that did not happen to his son. Luis hired the best musical teachers available and for the next 12 years supervised a tireless regimen of private lessons and personal practice. He hammered into his son the importance of self-discipline, something that never left him.
And there was no room for deviation.
My father didn't have a very good temperament. To work with all the conductors, he played with Toscanini, he played with the big names, and some of them were very hard. He was a very nervous person. I mean, he would come home and he wanted to be quiet, and if he saw a little piece of paper on the floor, you know, he would make a big thing. He was very hypochondriac and always very sick with ulcers. I remember his cabinet was full of medicine, full of medicine.
Summer vacations were no exception. While everyone was enjoying the sun and the surf, Lalo was inside practicing the piano hours on end.
Well, Lalo's first piano teacher was Daniel Barenboim's father. 4.5 years old Lalo had. And Daniel Barenboim's father beat him, his little fingers. Can you imagine studying piano and being beaten. My mother cried.
Enrique, his father, was tough. He was tougher than my father. And when I would make a mistake, he hit me and it hurt. But what can I do? That was it.
By the time he was 12, Lalo played piano for Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue at the Teatro Cologne.
One of the first concerts that he gave, Lalo, he was very young, was with the Rhapsody in Blue.
Lalo also studied with a Russian expatriate named Andreas Karalis, former head of the Kiev Conservatory of Music, as well as famed Argentine composer Juan Carlos Paz.
We would meet in a cafe, you know, without piano, which is the way to do it. Not the cafe, but not without piano. Well, the cafe was a place where he wanted to have coffee, and there was no need for piano. In harmony, everything is abstract, and you should be able to read the music the same way you read a book.
In his mid-teens, Lalo began to assert himself from his father's rigid control.
I told my father that for a while I was going to stop studying with teachers. And I meant it, because the college was becoming very, very difficult.
If I didn't have Lalo, I think my youth, my childhood would have been awful. But Lalo was an oasis, you know, with the music and his humor. So for me, Lalo was, you know, the father that I never had, you know, the older brother. He made it a point that he would educate me musically, with books. He forbid me. I was reading Little Women, and he said, that's not for me. I was a child. I loved it. Nobody could say anything about my brother. I could fight with him, you know, and we would fight a lot. You know, we used to be quite violent at times. But if anybody touched my brother, be careful, okay? I had like a baseball bat, and all his friends, I was terrorizing them. And Lalo says, you protected me. He said, he'll never forget.
It was at this time he found his new love, American jazz. He sat alone in his room for hours, listening to Charlie Parker records, Thelonious Monk, Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and Dizzy Gillespie. For years, whenever Lalo left the house, he would joke to his mother, if Dizzy calls, tell him I'm not here.
If Dizzy Gillespie calls, tell him that I'm not here. That's a wishful thinking, you know, but it happened.
These records were not readily available, so he bought them from a merchant marine, paying for them months in advance. Whenever he picked them up at the port, he stuffed them into his pants and, no matter the weather, wore a long trench coat to conceal them from the authorities.
They were so incredibly good that you have to have a technique like playing Chopin or Mozart.
Luis opposed Lalo's new passion. His preference for classical music aside, he didn't think jazz required the same skill as classical. But his real objection was the lifestyle associated with jazz: alcohol, drugs, and prostitution. Luis took matters into his own hands and enrolled Lalo into law school at the University of Buenos Aires. It was in the midst of his law studies that Lalo, at the suggestion of Juan Carlos Paz, applied to the Paris Conservatory. Once accepted, he told his father he was abandoning law for music.
his reaction was, okay, I abandon Lalo and I take care of Luigi, Louis Bacalò. Because Luigi was a very good pianist, very good, and he gave concerts with classical music. So my father dedicated himself to Louis, and he abandoned Lalo because he was a jazz musician. So he nixed him. But it was good because, then we didn't fight so much.
But getting into the Paris Conservatory, passing the rigorous exam, beating out hundreds of applicants was only one of 3 hurdles. Like all young men his age, he'd been drafted into the army for 2 years. The only way to get out was to win a lottery. He was ushered into a room with other hopefuls where a commander had strewn a large desk with dozens of pieces of paper crumpled into balls, only one of which granted an official release. Soldier after soldier each picked a ball of paper only to be disappointed. It was Lalo's turn.
The sun was illuminating one of the balls, and I said, I want that one. I opened it and he said yes. I was out.
He faced one final obstacle. To obtain a passport, he would have to be questioned by police at the notorious Special Section.
Everybody heard about the Special Section. They torture people there.
This was Juan Perón's Argentina, a fascist state modeled after Nazi Germany. Those suspected of anti-Argentina activity were routinely sent to the Special Section, where many were tortured with whips and electric prods. Even as he entered the building, he could hear screams coming from the basement. In a vain attempt to drown out the sound, tango music blared from speakers throughout the building.
You hear the screams, the really screams, and tangos being played very loud. Tangos played very loud. That was a complete picture of the totalitarian state.
He was led into a room where an interrogator grilled him on his real motive for wanting to leave the country.
And he says, why don't we have good music schools here, music teachers? Why you need to go to Paris?
Playing on the man's nationalism, Lalo pointed out that his acceptance at such a renowned school was a great honor for the country, that he would be representing Argentina.
So I kept talking and talking, and finally he looked at me, and I was trembling, and he had the passport, and he stamped it and signed it and said, get out.
I cried every night.
At the conservatory, Lalo studied under renowned French composer Olivier Messiaen, a disciple of Ravel.
When you are learning what you want to learn, and from great teachers, and they know how to teach you, everything is great. It really is great. That was the best age to learn what I had to learn. There were no limits. I knew it. So I wanted to learn more and more and more and more and more.
Despite the intense program, Lalo quickly realized he would need to find a job in addition to his schoolwork. He hated dorm life and dorm food, especially when the streets of Paris were lined with cafes and bistros beckoning to him.
I am a bourgeois. You know, I was born, I like to live well, I like to eat well. So I got my own apartment, for which I had to pay.
Latin jazz was in high demand, and Lalo developed a reputation for writing such arrangements.
The Cuban music, mambo and cha-cha-cha and all that became very popular, and the French arrangers didn't know how to do it. So I did, and I became very much in demand. You know, maybe I could have stayed in Paris forever and working as an arranger, because they pay well.
He also got a job playing piano in jazz clubs late at night. His schedule in Paris was punishing. A full day of studies, followed by hours of piano practice and homework. After which he wrote arrangements, then grabbed a quick dinner before hurrying off to a jazz club where he played until 3 or 4 in the morning. He would return to his apartment, catch an hour or 2 of sleep, then start the day all over again. This kind of exhausting schedule is something he would maintain for most of the rest of his life.
It was fantastic. We had a great time.
During summer break, Lalo toured with a jazz band. Europe was still reeling from the devastation of the war, and jazz was the music of liberation, peace, and post-war euphoria. It was at this time that he received his first offer to play with an American jazz legend. Chet Baker was on tour when he heard Lalo play and asked him to join him. Lalo, only 23 at the time, wanted to finish his studies first. Moreover, he was apprehensive of the trumpeter's well-known drug habit. In fact, the reason Baker needed a replacement was that his own piano player had just died of an overdose. Though extremely tempted, Lalo turned Chet Baker down. When he crossed the Atlantic for France, Lalo assumed he may never see Argentina again, the oppressive regime convincing him never to return. But during his time at the conservatory, the Perón government was toppled in a military coup.
He didn't want to go back to Argentina because we had Perón. But when Perón was ousted, I called him, I said, Lalo, now is the time for you to come back. He came back.
My brother made a big party, celebrating that I was coming back. My friends, my family, they all came. There was a lot of people there. It was nice.
One of the members of the new administration, Dario Castel, happened to be a huge fan of jazz, and upon his return asked Lalo to form a jazz band to play on the radio and television.
Lalo Schfrin.
Almost overnight, Lalo became a sensation and a household name.
And I couldn't believe it because immediately I got visibility, popularity, and I could do anything I wanted. I was doing concerts.
That was very good. He had the best people in Argentina playing for him. My father, who was so strict, as you can imagine, he wouldn't go to sleep until Lalo came home. Can you imagine that? 4 o'clock in the morning, Lalo, I don't know what he did after performing in the jazz clubs.
6 months later, one of Lalo's idols was touring South America as a goodwill ambassador for the State Department. Among the band members was a young Quincy Jones. The concerts were all sold out, but Lalo managed to get into every single one of them. He even dragged his father along to one of them, the elder having softened his views on jazz.
Well, I actually didn't know him then, and someone introduced us down in Argentina. And we hung out a little bit together, and he came to all the concerts.
At the end of the tour, the government held a dinner in Dizzy's honor. Lalo and his orchestra were asked to play for the event.
Por la orquesta Lalo Schfrin.
When Dizzy heard Lalo play, it was the second time a jazz legend would ask him to join him. Dizzy approached the piano after the session.
He heard me playing the piano because I conducted from the piano, so that was... But said, who wrote all these charts? And I said, I did. would you like to come to the United States? And I thought he was kidding. Maybe they call him Dizzy because he's a great sense of humor. You could read that invitation many, many ways. For me, it was a real invitation, and it was.
Dizzy Gillespie asked Lalo to come to America and play piano for him. Leaving Argentina the second time would prove more difficult than the first.
I had to go through the American consulate to get a visa. I had already a passport.
Applying for a visa with the American embassy took a year and a half of paperwork, during which an entirely new opportunity presented itself to Lalo. He was asked to score a movie. El Jefe, or The Chief, was a thinly veiled story of Perón's rise to power. The film was a huge success, earning the equivalent of Argentina's Academy Award for Best Picture. Although Lalo was determined to go to New York and work with Dizzy Gillespie, the seed had been planted.
And then he came to America. And about that time, I was getting ready to fire my piano player.
He was a genius, you know, he really was a genius. Reaction that the Gillespian did in the jazz public and in the public in general and among the elite musicians in New York, they were all talking about me, and they were all coming with projects. We were doing concerts with Duke Ellington's big band, and we were all traveling in a big bus, the Duke Ellington band and Dizzy Gillespie band. They were all African Americans, except me. There were 2 concerts a day, one in the matinee and the other after in another place. Had to travel to another place. So obviously they wanted to eat, everybody, me too. We wanted to eat before the concert. So as we are arriving to any of these places, they would say, I'm sorry, we were closing because there were so many blacks. So on the before we went to the next one, it was a Denny's or something, they said to the driver, look, don't stop in front of the restaurant before stop a little before the restaurant. And let me go by myself and ask. And I went, and I asked, do you have a room for 40 people or something? We are musicians on tour, and, oh yeah, come in. So, and when they saw all this,